Welcome to the Sovereign CEO podcast, where we talk about how to build location-independent income through your own location-independent business, move to a less bad country, or at least set up an international backup plan like I have done here in Paraguay as I record this podcast video, and do all these things for very little money. I've done several podcasts in the past where I've touched on this topic. I've never delved deep into this topic in podcast or video form. I have discussed aspects of this topic over at my blogs. And that is the difference between living in a democracy and living in a monarchy. Matter of fact, I mentioned this in the last podcast where I talked about, I was in Mexico at the time actually when I recorded that podcast, when I talked about the Queen of England dying. And I kind of touched on this a little bit. A lot of you were asking questions about this. So this is the unofficial follow-up to that. First, I'm going to talk about why democracy is terrible. And then I'm going to talk about why a monarchy can be much better in terms of living in a democracy versus living in a monarchy. I'm not talking about you being a monarch. Yeah, you're probably not a king or an emperor, right? I'm not. So there you go. So first, let's cover democracy. I have talked about this at my blogs for years. So this is a summary of what I've already talked about in my blogs. Let's say you live in a country where it is a democracy. And let's say you drive a blue car. Actually, you know what? You don't even drive a blue car. You drive any color car you want, but it's not blue. Let's say that the people vote, and 60% of the people vote that anyone who owns a blue car must have one of their fingers removed, surgically removed. They're not going to take an axe and chop it off, but you have to report to the doctor, and they're going to forcibly remove one of your fingers. You have no choice. Does that make it right because people voted for it? No, it doesn't. Okay? So democracy is not a good idea. Benjamin Franklin has a famous quote where he said that democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to eat for dinner. He also said, and many other founding fathers have said, that democracy will eventually turn into socialism or some form of that where people will start voting for other people's money. I've given this statistic before. Pre-pandemic, it is much worse now, but pre-pandemic in the United States, the free United States, 50% of all households in the United States were on some form of government assistance. They were getting some form of money from the government. Half of the households in the country of over 300 million people before the pandemic. During the pandemic and since the pandemic, I don't even know. I don't even care. I don't live in the United States anymore. The United States is your problem if you live there. It's not my problem anymore. But goddamn, that's what happens when you have a democracy. Now I know what the answer is. Well, Caleb, the United States is not a democracy. It is a constitutional republic, which means that the democracy is limited by what people can do. Okay, who's the president of the United States? He was voted via democracy, right? Some form of democracy. Well, people didn't directly vote for Joe Biden. Okay, he was elected via multiple state elections, wasn't he? And I actually covered on my blogs when the Democrats or the elites that ran the Democrat Party basically took all the other candidates running for Democratic side of the president and told them all to go fuck themselves. And they basically kind of pushed Joe Biden. And people in all these caucuses and all these state elections voted for Joe Biden. So in that respect, it was a democracy. It was the will of the people, right? Right. So does that make sense? No. Democracy is not the best form of government, and democracy does not equal freedom. And I'm including the constitutional republic. By the way, the United States isn't a constitutional republic anymore and hasn't been for a very long time. Now that gets into a very long analytical discussion that is outside the scope of this podcast. But if you think for 1 minute that the United States is a functioning constitutional republic, no one pays any attention to the Constitution. Are you fucking kidding? Wrong. You are wrong. I'm sorry. And it is also true that it is not 100% democracy, but you get my point. I could also give you many statistics or many facts from history about how the vast majority of Americans democratically approved of slavery in the 1800s. Does that mean it was a good idea? Does that mean it was a free country? No. Now, next aspect to democracies being shitty. If you look at the Index for Economic Freedom, and there are many of them, there are several of them, if you look at the top freest, or in this case, the least unfree countries in the world, because there are no free countries anymore, but if you look now and over the past 20 years at the top least unfree countries in the world, over the past 20 years, the top two countries almost every year in almost every index are Hong Kong and Singapore. Now, are Hong Kong and Singapore free countries? They are not. They are not free countries. They're not. They're not. Particularly Singapore. But in many respects, and maybe not today, but over the past 20 years, they were the freest or least unfree countries in the world. That is an absolute fact. That is true. That's why I love Hong Kong so much, or at least used to, before China put its neck on it back in 2019. And I really like Singapore a lot, although I do have some complaints about Singapore, but these are two great, great countries. In terms of the countries we have available to us today, the shitstorm that the whole planet is in terms of countries of the world, these are the two, or among the two least bad countries in the world. Fact. Now, let me ask you a question. Is Hong Kong or Singapore a democracy? No, they are not. In Singapore, the right to vote is not recognized. And the vast majority of people who live in Singapore are not allowed to vote. In Hong Kong has a legislature, and you can vote for some of those people, but half, I believe more than half now, but historically half of the legislature were not elected officials. They were appointed. Is that democratic? In no way is that democratic at all. These are not democracies in any sense of the word. Yet, historically, and even today to a degree, they are among or are the least unfree countries in the world. What does that indicate to you? It indicates that if you want real freedom, low taxes, property rights, low business regulations, low banking regulations, you don't want democracy. Matter of fact, for many years, there was a raging debate in Hong Kong. It may still be going on there, I don't know. But I know it was going on for years, where people in Hong Kong, particularly young people, wanted Hong Kong to be more democratic. And the older people in Hong Kong said, are you insane? You want to be a democracy? Why? Do you want 40% tax rates like in Europe, where there are democracies in Europe? We in Hong Kong pay a flat 15% income tax. You want to pay a 40% income tax and say, oh, we're a democracy? Is that fucking worth it? You want to be like Europe? Really? Are you guys crazy? That was an ongoing debate for many years. It may still be happening. Democracy is something that you want if you want socialism or some variation of it. If you support socialism, or if you're not a socialist, but you're a modern day Bernie Sanders democratic socialist, or democratic, whatever the fuck they're word using now to cloak the fact they're socialists, and you just like the welfare state, you are pro-welfare state, then you want people to vote. That is why left-wingers always want so many people to vote, right? Left-wingers and Democrats in the United States and other places want everybody to vote. They want idiots to vote. They want 18-year-olds to vote. They want prisoners in prison to vote. They want the military to vote. They want everyone to vote. Why are they so hot to trot to get everyone to vote? Because they know the more people who vote, the more likely they are to get welfare state reforms, which is true. This is why many libertarians and some actual true small government conservatives, which don't really exist anymore, have always said, you know what, I'd rather you not vote. I'd rather you stay. If you're an idiot, I'd rather you just stay home. I think we should have less people voting, not more, because they know the more people who vote, the bigger government will get, the more welfare state bullshit you'll get, the higher taxes will go up, the more regulations on business, the less freedom you'll have, the less property rights you have, and so on. Democracy is not a mechanism for freedom. Democracy is a mechanism for socialism or welfare statism. This is why overtly socialist countries like Australia require you by law to vote. My God, you Australians. Oh, and they'll actually defend it. Well, yeah, that's a great idea. You should vote. Yes, these are left-wingers who love the concept of welfare statism. Right? Right. So this means that if you want true freedom, real freedom to last as long as you're able to have it last, you don't want people voting. You don't want democracy. Now, does that mean you want a dictatorship? Does that mean you want North Korea? Because as soon as you say people shouldn't vote, what is the picture they paint in their minds? They think of Hitler and Mussolini and North Korea and Cuba. They think of horrible dictatorship shitholes. Are those the only two options in life? Democracy like the United States or North Korea? Those are your only two choices? No. I live in a country called the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, where it's a third choice, and there's more than three choices. There's 5, 6, 7, 8 choices. But I live in a country where I pay virtually no taxes. I pay a little bit only because I'm an American coming from a democratic country. And that country is a monarchy. Now, it is a constitutional monarchy. It's not a literal monarchy, just like the United States is not a literal democracy. The way the monarchy works in Dubai is a little complicated. It's not just one king who can do literally whatever he wants. It is a king-like figure, but there are other kingish figures. There are advisors. There are other people who have influence over what he says. Sometimes they vote on things. But it is much closer to a monarchy of the United States or any other Western country. That's absolutely true. And Dubai is one of the fastest growing places in the world. It's one of the most economically prosperous places in the world. It is the place where lots of people are wanting to go. It is a place that is on the rise. It is a place I chose to move to out of 190 plus countries. I had so many options. I could move anywhere in the world, right? More or less. And I chose Dubai. Why? Because it's economically less unfree than most other countries in the world, because it's a monarchy. And because it was run by people, monarchs, or a team of monarchs, you'd call it maybe a rough oligarchy, let's say, who said several years ago, Sheikh Zayed in particular, he said, we want to be very profitable. We want to have lots of money here. We want to attract the world. We want to be an economic power. So that means we're going to have to cut taxes, cut regulations, let businesses do what they want, not tax people. And that way we'll attract people who will come in here and we'll become like Singapore. We'll become like Hong Kong. And they were right. That's exactly what happened. That would have never occurred if it was a democracy, because people would have voted for, no, I want high taxes because I want free stuff. I want free services and free this and free that and free this and free that. And it would have never been anywhere near what it is today. Now, does that mean that you risk a problem if you live in a monarchy? Yes, sure. So at some point, the Sheikh could die. Matter of fact, Sheikh Khalifa just died. He died last year. But the king or the main people in power could eventually get old and die and could be replaced by the young prince. There's a prince in Dubai. His name is Faz, and he is the heir apparent to all this stuff. And yes, he can become the new monarch. And again, it's a limited monarchy. It's not a dictatorship. He can't do literally whatever he wants. It's not like North Korea. But yes, he could come in and do a bunch of stupid things and cause problems. So here's how I look at this. With Dubai's safeguards, what few they have, and Dubai's current infrastructure, if a moron became in charge, became the next monarch, and started doing all kinds of horrible things, he started jacking up taxes and passing a bunch of, hardcore, Muslim Islamic reforms that would make my lifestyle difficult. If he did all these things, it would take a long time for things to get to the point where they would affect me personally. It's not like he can snap his fingers and make sweeping changes because A, the infrastructure of Dubai's or UAE's government, and B, the infrastructure they already have. It's not like a place like Belarus or Cuba, many years ago, where one guy could come in, snap his fingers, and enact instant change that would happen instantly. That's really not going to be the case. So I would recommend, if you're looking at living in a monarchy, a place like Monaco, or Dubai, places like that, you look at places that have some safeguards in the government, A, and have significant infrastructure where it would take a longer time to make sweeping, vast changes. Now, that's not a guarantee either. There could be a problem, and I've said this 10,000 times, there is no perfect country. I don't say move to a better country, I say move to a less bad country because all countries suck. The UAE sucks, it does. But it sucks much less bad than the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia. That's why I didn't move to those countries. So I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying you got to pick, you have a big pile of turds. Which turd do you want? The smallest one that smells the least bad. You pick that one. Bottom line is, at least in the modern era, if you do your homework, your odds of living a free lifestyle are actually slightly better living in a monarchy today, I'm not talking about 100 years ago, today, than living in a country that touts their democracy and we want everyone voting. And if you live in a democracy, you'll be paying 40% taxes. Have fun. If you live in a monarchy, you have a shot at paying 0% or 2% or 5% taxes, or at least less than 10% taxes like I do. That's the bottom line of this stuff. Lastly, I'll end with this. Were you ever taught any of this in school? Did you know, you Americans, that when America was founded, and for many years after its founding, most white men could not vote? You didn't know that, did you? Okay, and even when you say that to Americans now, they don't believe it. Like, oh, that's bullshit. Yes, they did. No, they couldn't. In school, they're all focused on black people not being able to vote, women not being able to vote, right? Most white men could not vote at the founding of the United States for many years. You know why? Because the founders knew They did not want a fucking democracy. It would turn into a clusterfuck, socialist, quagmire nightmare, which is what you have today in the United States because they embraced democracy. Not smart. I will see you in the next podcast. Have fun. Bye.